Logistics during the American Civil War. Nono Umasi. The American Civil War, which raged from 1861 to 1865, was a monumental conflict that pitted the northern states, the Union, against the southern states that seceded to form the Confederacy. This war, driven by profound economic, social, and political differences, particularly the issue of slavery, resulted in significant loss of life and vast social upheaval. The Union, under President Abraham Lincoln, sought to preserve the nation, while the Confederacy, led by President Jefferson Davis, fought for its independence. The war's vast scale and the complexities of 19th-century combat required extensive logistical efforts to sustain the armies and ultimately played a crucial role in determining the conflict's outcome. Logistics, the detailed organization and implementation of complex operations, was essential for the American Civil War, influencing the movement, supply, and effectiveness of both Union and Confederate forces. Efficient logistics ensured that armies were adequately supplied with food, ammunition, medical supplies, and other necessities, directly impacting their operational capability. In a war characterized by massive battles and long campaigns over diverse and challenging terrains, the ability to maintain a steady flow of supplies often determined the success or failure of military operations. Poor logistical planning could lead to starvation, disease, and demoralization among troops, while effective logistics provided a strategic advantage that could decisively influence the outcome of engagements and ultimately the war itself. Foundations of logistics during the American Civil War. Pre-war logistical infrastructure in the United States. Prior to the outbreak of the Civil War, the United States had developed a considerable logistical infrastructure, though it was unevenly distributed across the North and South. The North boasted an extensive network of railroads, canals, and roadways, which facilitated the efficient movement of goods and people. The South, while possessing a fair share of railroads and ports, lagged behind the North in terms of connectivity and industrial capacity. Major cities in the North, such as New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, were well linked to inland regions, promoting robust economic activity. In contrast, the South's infrastructure primarily supported its agricultural economy, which relied heavily on the export of cotton and other cash crops. Industry and agriculture played pivotal roles in supporting the war efforts of both the Union and the Confederacy. In the North, a well-established industrial base provided a diverse array of goods necessary for sustaining a modern army, including weapons, ammunition, clothing, and medical supplies. The North's agriculture was highly mechanized and diversified, ensuring a steady supply of food to its troops. In the South, agriculture was the backbone of the economy, with vast plantations producing cotton, tobacco, and rice. However, the Southern economy lacked the industrial base necessary to produce the wide range of military supplies needed for a prolonged conflict. This disparity meant that the Confederacy was heavily reliant on imports, particularly for weapons and manufactured goods, which became increasingly difficult to obtain due to the Union's naval blockade. Industrial and agricultural capabilities of the North and South. The North's industrial capabilities far surpassed those of the South. By 1860, the northern states accounted for approximately 90% of the nation's manufacturing output. This industrial might included ironworks, textile mills, and factories capable of mass-producing weapons and other military supplies. The North also had a larger population, providing a substantial labor force for both its armies and its factories. The South, in contrast, was predominantly agricultural, with limited industrial capacity. While it had some ironworks and munitions factories, they were few in number and often lacked the raw materials and skilled labor needed for large-scale production. Southern agriculture was highly dependent on slave labor and focused on cash crops rather than foodstuffs, leading to periodic shortages of essential supplies for both the civilian population and the military. Initial logistical preparedness of the Union and Confederate armies. At the outset of the Civil War, the Union Army was better positioned in terms of logistical preparedness. The existing infrastructure in the North facilitated the rapid mobilization and supply of troops. Additionally, the Union had access to a well-established navy, which played a crucial role in enforcing blockades and controlling key waterways. The Confederate Army, on the other hand, faced significant logistical challenges from the beginning. The South's infrastructure was not as developed, and its rail network was less extensive and less standardized, leading to inefficiencies in transportation. Moreover, the Southern economy was not geared toward supporting a large-scale industrial war effort, making it difficult to equip and sustain its armies adequately. Key logistical challenges faced by both the Union and Confederate armies. Both the Union and Confederate armies encountered numerous logistical challenges throughout the war. For the Union, one of the primary challenges was the vast geographical area it needed to control and defend. Ensuring that supply lines remained secure over such a large and hostile territory required significant resources and coordination. Additionally, the Union had to develop and implement strategies for effectively using its industrial and transportation advantages to sustain prolonged military campaigns. The Confederacy faced even greater logistical hurdles. The Union blockade severely restricted the South's ability to import essential goods and materials. Additionally, the South's rail network was insufficient for the demands of war, and the limited industrial base struggled to keep pace with the needs of the Army. The lack of standardized rail gauges complicated the transfer of supplies between different regions. The Confederacy also had to contend with resource shortages, as its focus on cash crops left it vulnerable to food shortages and inflation. Railroads and trains during the American Civil War. Railroads were arguably the most significant logistical innovation of the Civil War era, transforming the way armies were supplied and moved. The strategic importance of these rail networks lay in their ability to transport large quantities of supplies and troops swiftly over long distances, which was essential for sustaining the large armies and extended campaigns of the Civil War. By the 1860s, the United States had built approximately 30,000 miles of railroad tracks, with the North possessing around 22,000 miles and the South about 9,000 miles. In the North, a well-developed and extensive rail network provided a significant logistical advantage. The South, though possessing a less extensive network, still relied heavily on railroads to move its forces and supplies. Control over key rail hubs and lines often determined the success of military operations, making railroads prime targets for both Union and Confederate forces. Construction, control, and utilization. The Union's pre-war industrial strength included a well-developed railroad network that connected major cities and industrial centers. Railroads such as the Pennsylvania Railroad and the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad played critical roles in moving troops and supplies. During the war, the Union rapidly expanded its rail network, constructing new lines and repairing damaged ones. The efficient control and utilization of railroads allowed the Union to project power deep into Confederate territory, exemplified by campaigns like Sherman's Atlanta campaign. The Confederacy's rail network was less extensive and less interconnected than the Union's, with around 9,000 miles of track compared to the North's 22,000 miles. Despite these limitations, Confederate railroads were crucial for moving troops and supplies within the South. The Confederacy faced significant challenges in rail construction and maintenance due to shortages of materials and skilled labor. Key rail hubs, such as Atlanta and Richmond, became strategic targets for Union forces aiming to cripple Southern logistics. Key facts and figures. During the Civil War, the Union railroads transported over 2 million troops and approximately 96 million tons of supplies, highlighting their crucial role in sustaining the war effort. The Confederacy managed to build some new rail lines despite the scarcity of resources, such as the Piedmont Railroad, which connected Greensboro, North Carolina, to Danville, Virginia, and provided a critical link between Richmond and the Deep South. The Confederate rail network deteriorated over time due to heavy use, lack of maintenance, and destruction by Union forces. By the war's end, many Southern railroads were inoperable or severely damaged. Role of the United States Military Railroad, USMRR. The establishment of the United States Military Railroad, USMRR, in 1862 marked a significant advancement in military logistics. The USMRR was tasked with constructing, maintaining, and operating railroads to support Union military operations. Under the leadership of General Herman Haupt, the USMRR efficiently managed rail transport, ensuring the rapid movement of troops and supplies. The USMRR's efforts were instrumental in several key campaigns, including the repair and operation of the rail line to Chattanooga following the Union victory there in 1863. General Herman Haupt was a pivotal figure in Civil War railroad logistics. As the head of the USMRR, Haupt's engineering expertise and innovative approaches transformed the Union's rail operations. He developed techniques for quickly repairing destroyed bridges and tracks, ensuring the continuous flow of supplies. Haupt's contributions were vital during the Gettysburg Campaign and the Siege of Petersburg, where efficient rail logistics supported prolonged military operations. John W. Garrett, president of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, played a crucial role in supporting the Union war effort. Garrett's cooperation with the USMRR and his strategic decisions in maintaining and protecting key rail lines significantly aided the Union's logistics. His efforts ensured that the B&O Railroad remained a vital supply route throughout the war. Challenges of maintaining and protecting railroads. Maintaining and protecting railroads posed significant challenges for both the Union and the Confederacy. Rail lines were frequent targets for enemy raids and sabotage, with bridges and tracks often destroyed to disrupt supply lines. The Union employed various measures to protect its railroads, including constructing blockhouses, deploying armed guards, and using armored trains. Despite these efforts, Confederate guerrilla tactics and cavalry raids, such as those led by General John S. Mosby, continually threatened Union rail operations. The Confederacy faced even greater difficulties due to limited resources and the Union's strategic offensives. The destruction of rail infrastructure during Sherman's march to the sea exemplified the vulnerability of Confederate railroads. The Union's systematic targeting of Southern rail hubs and lines severely hampered the Confederacy's ability to sustain its war effort. Innovations and technological advancements in railroad logistics. The Civil War spurred numerous innovations and technological advancements in railroad logistics. One significant development was the use of telegraph lines alongside railroads, which enhanced communication and coordination. The ability to transmit orders and updates quickly allowed for more responsive and efficient rail operations. The USMRR also pioneered several engineering techniques, such as prefabricated bridge components and rapid track-laying methods, which expedited repairs and construction. The use of armored trains, equipped with cannons and reinforced with iron plating, provided protection against enemy attacks and became an essential tool for safeguarding rail lines. Another notable advancement was the development of specialized rail cars, including hospital cars for transporting wounded soldiers and refrigerated cars for preserving food supplies. These innovations improved the overall efficiency and effectiveness of military logistics. The Battle of Chattanooga, 1863. One notable example of the strategic use of railroads was during the Chattanooga Campaign in 1863. After the Union's victory at the Battle of Chattanooga, the USMRR quickly repaired and extended rail lines to support General Ulysses S. Grant's operations. The rapid movement of troops and supplies by rail enabled the Union to press its advantage and ultimately lead to the capture of Atlanta in 1864. The Atlanta Campaign, 1864. General Sherman's Atlanta campaign underscored the importance of railroads in wartime strategy. Sherman's forces systematically targeted and destroyed Confederate railroads, including the Western and Atlantic Railroad, which was vital for supplying the Confederate Army of Tennessee. Sherman's infamous March to the Sea further demonstrated the Union's reliance on railroads. After capturing Atlanta, his army relied on the Western and Atlantic Railroad to transport supplies before embarking on the destructive march across Georgia. Impact on military strategy and operations. Railroads fundamentally changed military strategy during the Civil War. They allowed for rapid concentration and deployment of forces, enabling commanders to respond quickly to threats and opportunities. The ability to transport large numbers of troops and vast quantities of supplies over long distances meant that armies could operate farther from their home bases and maintain sustained campaigns. In the Union, the integration of railroads into military strategy was exemplified by General Grant's Overland Campaign, where continuous rail supply lines supported his aggressive push towards Richmond. For the Confederacy, despite the challenges, railroads remained vital for the movement of troops between fronts, such as the transfer of General James Longstreet's corps from Virginia to Tennessee in 1863. Transportation networks during the American Civil War. Role of rivers and naval transport. Rivers and naval transport were essential components of Civil War logistics, particularly for the Union. The extensive river systems of the United States, including the Mississippi, Ohio, and Tennessee rivers, provided crucial routes for the movement of troops and supplies. Control of these waterways allowed the Union to effectively bisect the Confederacy, disrupting internal supply lines and enabling rapid deployment of forces. The Union Navy's control of the Mississippi River was a strategic victory that split the Confederacy and cut off critical supply routes. Naval gunboats and transport ships facilitated major operations such as the Vicksburg Campaign, where General Ulysses S. Grant's forces used the river to transport troops and supplies, ultimately leading to the capture of Vicksburg in July 1863. Similarly, the control of the Tennessee River supported General William T. Sherman's Chattanooga campaign, allowing for the rapid movement and resupply of Union forces. For the Confederacy, rivers were also vital, though they faced significant challenges due to the Union's naval superiority. Confederate forces utilized rivers for transportation where possible, but the Union blockade and control of major waterways severely restricted their movement. The Confederates' use of smaller, less navigable rivers provided limited logistical support and highlighted the strategic disadvantage they faced in naval transport. Challenges of overland transport and the use of wagons and animals. Overland transport during the Civil War was fraught with challenges, primarily due to the lack of developed infrastructure and the difficult terrain. Roads were often poorly maintained and became nearly impassable during adverse weather conditions. The reliance on wagons and animals for overland transport was essential, but posed significant logistical difficulties. Wagon trains, consisting of hundreds of wagons, were a common sight and a critical component of military logistics. These wagons transported food, ammunition, medical supplies, and other necessities. However, managing large wagon trains required careful planning and coordination to ensure the efficient movement of supplies. The logistical complexity included securing adequate forage for the draft animals, maintaining the wagons, and protecting the convoys from enemy raids. The movement of wagons was slow and vulnerable to attack. Confederate forces, such as those led by General Nathan Bedford Forrest, frequently targeted Union supply lines, destroying wagons and disrupting logistics. Conversely, Union raids, such as those conducted by General Philip Sheridan, aimed to cut off Confederate supplies, highlighting the vulnerability of overland transport. Importance of horses and mules, their role in transportation and logistics. Horses and mules were indispensable to Civil War logistics, serving as the primary means of overland transport. They were used to pull wagons, artillery, ambulances, and for cavalry units. The demand for these animals was immense, with armies requiring thousands to sustain their operations. Horses were prized for their speed and agility, making them ideal for cavalry units and fast-moving logistics. Cavalry units played critical roles in reconnaissance, raiding, and skirmishing, relying on the mobility provided by horses. Mules, known for their strength and endurance, were preferred for heavy hauling and pulling supply wagons. They were more resilient to harsh conditions and required less forage than horses, making them vital for sustained logistical operations. The health and availability of these animals were constant concerns. Disease, overwork, and inadequate forage often led to high attrition rates. Both the Union and Confederacy established systems for the procurement, training, and care of horses and mules. The Union's larger industrial base and agricultural resources allowed it to maintain a more robust supply of these animals compared to the Confederacy, which faced severe shortages. Overcoming geographical and environmental obstacles. The diverse and challenging geography of the United States posed significant obstacles for Civil War logistics. Mountains, rivers, swamps, and forests all presented unique challenges that required innovative solutions. In mountainous regions, such as the Appalachians, narrow passes and rugged terrain made transportation difficult. Engineers constructed roads and bridges to facilitate movement, often under hazardous conditions. The Union's use of pontoon bridges, which could be rapidly deployed and dismantled, enabled armies to cross rivers swiftly, maintaining the momentum of their campaigns. Swamps and forests, particularly in the southern states, posed additional challenges. Dense vegetation and waterlogged ground made traditional transportation methods impractical. The use of corduroy roads, made by laying logs perpendicular to the direction of the road over swampy ground, allowed for the movement of wagons and artillery. These makeshift roads were labor-intensive to build and maintain, but were essential for navigating difficult terrain. Environmental conditions, such as extreme heat in the south and cold winters in the north, also impacted logistics. Armies had to adapt to seasonal changes, ensuring adequate shelter, clothing, and provisions to withstand the elements. The Union's industrial capacity allowed it to produce and distribute supplies more effectively, giving it an advantage in overcoming these environmental challenges. Supply chains and depots during the American Civil War. Establishment and organization of supply depots. The establishment and organization of supply depots were critical to maintaining effective logistics during the Civil War. Supply depots served as central hubs where vast quantities of food, ammunition, medical supplies, and other necessities were stored and distributed to the front lines. These depots were strategically located near railroads, rivers, and major roadways to facilitate efficient transportation and resupply operations. Supply depots were meticulously organized to ensure the rapid and accurate distribution of supplies. They were typically divided into sections for different types of goods, with designated areas for storage, distribution, and maintenance. Depot managers and clerks maintained detailed records to track inventory levels, monitor usage, and prevent shortages. Security was a paramount concern, with guards and fortifications protecting these vital installations from enemy raids and sabotage. Movement of supplies from factories and farms to the front lines. The movement of supplies from factories and farms to the front lines involved a complex logistical network that integrated multiple modes of transportation. In the Union, the robust industrial base produced vast quantities of military supplies, which were then transported via railroads, rivers, and roads to supply depots and forward positions. Factories in northern cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh churned out rifles, ammunition, uniforms, and other essential items. Agricultural regions provided food supplies, including preserved meats, hardtack, and grains. These goods were loaded onto trains or riverboats, transported to regional depots, and then forwarded to the front lines using a combination of rail, river, and wagon transport. The Confederacy, with its more limited industrial capacity, relied heavily on agricultural produce and imported goods. The movement of supplies was often hampered by Union blockades and the destruction of transportation infrastructure. Despite these challenges, the Confederacy developed an intricate network of supply routes, utilizing whatever means were available to keep their armies supplied. Key supply hubs and their roles in major campaigns. Union supply hubs. Washington, D.C. The primary logistical center for the Union, Washington, D.C. served as a major supply hub throughout the war. Its proximity to the front lines in Virginia made it a critical point for distributing supplies to Union armies operating in the Eastern Theater. Nashville, Tennessee. Captured by Union forces early in the war, Nashville became a vital supply hub for operations in the Western Theater. Its location on the Cumberland River and connections to railroads facilitated the movement of supplies to Union forces advancing through the South. Louisville, Kentucky. Another key supply hub, Louisville supported Union campaigns in Kentucky and Tennessee. Its rail and driver connections made it an essential point for resupplying Union armies. Confederate supply hubs, Richmond, Virginia. As the capital of the Confederacy, Richmond was a major supply hub and industrial center. The city's factories produced weapons, ammunition, and other military supplies, which were distributed to Confederate armies in the Eastern Theater. Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta's strategic location and rail connections made it a crucial supply hub for the Confederacy. It played a significant role in supporting Confederate forces in the Western Theater until its capture by Sherman in 1864. Vicksburg, Mississippi. Control of Vicksburg allowed the Confederacy to maintain vital supply lines along the Mississippi River until its fall to Union forces in 1863, which significantly disrupted Confederate logistics. The function and organization of the Quartermaster Corps. The Quartermaster Corps was the backbone of military logistics, responsible for the procurement, transportation, and distribution of supplies. Both the Union and Confederate armies had Quartermaster Corps, though the Union's was better organized and more efficient due to greater resources and industrial capacity. The Union Quartermaster Corps, led by General Montgomery C. Meigs, was highly effective in managing logistics. It oversaw the acquisition of supplies, the establishment of depots, and the coordination of transportation networks. The Corps implemented standardized procedures for inventory management, ensuring that supplies were available when and where needed. Meigs' leadership and organizational skills were instrumental in maintaining the Union's logistical advantage throughout the war. The Confederate Quartermaster Corps faced significant challenges, including resource shortages, transportation difficulties, and Union blockades. Despite these obstacles, the Corps managed to keep Confederate armies supplied through innovative solutions and resourcefulness. The Confederacy relied heavily on local procurement and impressment, seizing supplies from civilians to sustain its war effort. Water supply, establishing and maintaining water sources at depots and along supply routes. Water supply was a critical component of Civil War logistics, essential for both soldiers and animals. Ensuring a reliable water supply required careful planning and the establishment of water sources at depots and along supply routes. At supply depots, wells and cisterns were often dug to provide a steady supply of water. Engineers constructed aqueducts and pipelines where natural water sources were insufficient. In the field, armies relied on rivers, streams, and springs, but these sources were not always reliable or available. To maintain water supply along supply routes, armies used water wagons and portable filtration systems. The Union's larger logistical apparatus allowed for more sophisticated water management, including the use of steam-powered pumps to draw water from deeper wells and transport it to where it was needed. In contrast, Confederate forces often faced greater difficulties in securing clean water, particularly in areas where natural sources were scarce or contaminated by military activity. Food and forage during the American Civil War. Feeding the armies, rations and subsistence. Feeding the vast armies of the Civil War was a monumental task that required careful planning and efficient distribution methods. Both the Union and Confederate armies relied on standardized rations to ensure their soldiers received the necessary sustenance to maintain their strength and effectiveness in the field. The Union Army's standard ration included items such as hardtack, a type of hard biscuit, salt pork or bacon, coffee, sugar, and dried beans or peas. Fresh meat, vegetables, and bread were supplied when available, but these were often rare on active campaigns. The Union's industrial capacity allowed for the production and distribution of canned goods, which provided a more varied diet and improved nutritional intake. Rations were typically distributed by the commissary department and issued to soldiers in camp, while logistical units transported and distributed supplies to the front lines during campaigns. The Confederate Army's rations were similar but less consistent due to shortages and logistical difficulties. A typical Confederate ration might include cornmeal, bacon, molasses, peas, and rice. Fresh meat and vegetables were less frequently available, and soldiers often had to supplement their rations by foraging or purchasing additional food from local civilians. The Confederacy faced significant challenges in maintaining a steady supply of rations, leading to frequent food shortages and malnutrition among its troops. Foraging and its impact on civilian populations. Foraging became a necessary practice for both armies, especially during extended campaigns when regular supply lines were disrupted or insufficient. Soldiers would search for food in the surrounding countryside, taking livestock, crops, and other supplies from local farms and communities. While this practice helped sustain armies in the field, it had severe impacts on civilian populations. In the South, where the majority of the fighting took place, foraging by both Union and Confederate forces devastated local economies and communities. Farms were stripped of their produce and livestock, leaving civilians with little to survive on. Foraging practices also led to tensions and conflicts between soldiers and civilians, exacerbating the hardships of war. Challenges of maintaining food supplies for large armies. Maintaining consistent food supplies for large armies was a complex logistical challenge. The Union Army's advantage in industrial capacity and transportation infrastructure allowed it to more effectively manage its food supply chains. However, issues such as spoilage, transportation delays, and battlefield losses still posed significant challenges. The Confederate Army, with its limited resources and transportation difficulties, faced even greater challenges in maintaining food supplies. The Union blockade severely restricted the South's ability to import food and other essentials, leading to shortages and high prices. Additionally, the destruction of agricultural infrastructure by Union raids further reduced the South's ability to produce and distribute food. Preservation and transportation of food supplies. Preserving and transporting food supplies were critical concerns for both armies. Techniques such as salting, smoking, and drying were commonly used to preserve meat and other perishables. The Union's use of canned goods represented a significant advancement, allowing for longer shelf life and greater variety in soldiers' diets. Transportation of food supplies required careful coordination to prevent spoilage and ensure timely delivery. The use of railroads and river transport by the Union allowed for more efficient distribution of food supplies to depots and front lines. Wagons were then used to transport supplies from depots to troops in the field. For the Confederacy, transportation challenges were more pronounced due to the less developed infrastructure and ongoing Union offensives disrupting supply lines. Feeding animals. Logistics of providing forage and water. The logistics of feeding horses and mules were as crucial as feeding soldiers, given the animals' vital roles in transportation and cavalry units. Providing adequate forage and water for these animals required significant resources and planning. Horses and mules required large quantities of forage, primarily hay and grain, to maintain their health and performance. On average, a horse needed about 10 to 15 pounds of hay and 10-12 pounds of grain daily. Ensuring a steady supply of forage was challenging, especially in regions where local sources were depleted or unavailable. The Union's superior logistical capabilities allowed it to import hay and grain from distant regions, while the Confederacy often struggled to procure enough forage. Water supply. Water supply was another critical concern, particularly in arid or drought-stricken areas. Armies had to ensure that there were adequate water sources along supply routes and at camps. Engineers often constructed wells, dug trenches to access groundwater, or transported water in wagons when necessary. Maintaining clean water sources was essential to prevent disease and keep animals hydrated and healthy. The varying terrains and seasons presented unique challenges for feeding and watering animals. In mountainous regions, rugged terrain made transportation of forage difficult, while in swampy areas, finding dry ground for grazing was a challenge. During winter, snow and ice could obstruct supply routes and limit access to forage, necessitating additional planning and resources to ensure animals were adequately fed. In the summer, heat and humidity increased the risk of waterborne diseases and required more frequent watering of animals. The logistical effort to overcome these challenges involved continuous adaptation and resourcefulness, with both armies developing strategies to mitigate the impact of terrain and climate on their supply chains. Ammunition and arms during the American Civil War. The production and distribution of weapons and ammunition were vital to the military efforts of both the Union and the Confederacy during the Civil War. The Union's industrial strength enabled it to produce vast quantities of arms and ammunition, while the Confederacy, with its limited industrial base, faced significant challenges in equipping its forces. The Union leveraged its industrial capabilities to produce a wide array of weapons and ammunition. Northern factories, such as the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts and the Colt's Manufacturing Company in Connecticut, produced large quantities of rifles, pistols, and artillery. The Union also benefited from established infrastructure for mining and processing raw materials like iron and gunpowder, ensuring a steady supply of essential components. The Confederacy faced considerable difficulties in arms production due to its relatively underdeveloped industrial sector. Southern arsenals, like the Richmond Armory in Virginia and the Fayetteville Armory in North Carolina, worked to produce weapons, but they struggled with shortages of raw materials and skilled labor. The South also relied heavily on imports of arms and ammunition through blockade running and European support, particularly from Britain and France. However, the Union blockade severely restricted these imports, exacerbating the Confederacy's supply issues. Distribution. Distribution of weapons and ammunition required efficient logistics and transportation networks. The Union's extensive rail network facilitated the rapid movement of arms from production centers to supply depots and frontline units. Ammunition was often transported in specialized rail cars and then distributed to troops via wagons. The Confederacy relied on a more fragmented distribution system, using railroads where available and often resorting to overland transport in areas with limited infrastructure. The destruction of Southern rail lines by Union forces further complicated the distribution of arms and ammunition, leading to significant delays and shortages. The role of arsenals and armories in both the North and South. The Union had numerous arsenals and armories that provided a steady supply of arms and ammunition. Key facilities included the Springfield Armory, which was a major producer of the Springfield rifle, and the Watervliet Arsenal in New York, which produced artillery and munitions. These facilities were well-staffed and well-equipped, enabling the Union to meet the demands of its large and growing army. The Confederacy established several arsenals and armories to support its war effort, with the Richmond Armory being one of the most significant. Despite efforts to ramp up production, Confederate facilities were often hampered by shortages of machinery, raw materials, and skilled labor. The Tredegar Iron Works in Richmond, one of the few Southern factories capable of producing heavy artillery, became a vital resource for the Confederate war effort. The loss of key arsenals, such as the fall of Atlanta and Richmond, severely impacted the Confederacy's ability to sustain its forces. Supply shortages and their impact on combat effectiveness. Supply shortages had a profound impact on the combat effectiveness of both the Union and Confederate armies, though the effects were more pronounced in the Confederacy. While the Union was generally well supplied, there were instances of localized shortages due to logistical challenges, battlefield losses, or mismanagement. These shortages could temporarily hinder operations, but the Union's industrial base and efficient supply chains typically resolved these issues quickly. The Confederacy, however, faced chronic shortages of arms and ammunition throughout the war. The Union blockade severely limited the South's ability to import weapons and raw materials. Additionally, the destruction of transportation infrastructure and key production facilities by Union forces further exacerbated these shortages. Confederate soldiers often had to make do with inferior or outdated weapons, and units frequently ran low on ammunition during critical battles. These shortages impacted the Confederacy's ability to conduct sustained military operations and contributed to their eventual defeat. The lack of reliable arms and ammunition also affected morale, as soldiers were acutely aware of their material disadvantages compared to their Union counterparts. Communication and coordination during the American Civil War. Role of the telegraph in coordinating logistics. The advent of the telegraph revolutionized communication during the Civil War, becoming an indispensable tool for coordinating logistics. Before the telegraph, military communication relied heavily on couriers, messengers, and signal flags, which were slow and often unreliable. The telegraph allowed for near-instantaneous transmission of information over long distances, enabling commanders to make timely decisions and coordinate complex logistical operations. The Union, with its more extensive telegraph network, used this technology to great advantage. The U.S. Military Telegraph Corps, established in 1861, laid over 15,000 miles of telegraph wire during the war, connecting major cities, supply depots, and battlefields. This network facilitated the rapid exchange of orders, intelligence, and logistical information, ensuring that supplies could be redirected and resources reallocated as needed. For example, during the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, the telegraph was crucial in coordinating the movements of Union forces and ensuring timely resupply. The Confederacy, with a less developed telegraph infrastructure, also recognized the importance of this technology. However, they faced significant challenges due to the Union's destruction of telegraph lines and equipment, as well as shortages of materials needed to repair and expand their network. Despite these obstacles, Confederate forces used the telegraph effectively when possible, but their communication was often hampered by these limitations. The importance of dispatch riders and signal corps. While the telegraph was a significant advancement, traditional methods of communication remained essential, particularly in areas where telegraph lines were not available or had been destroyed. Dispatch riders and the signal corps played crucial roles in maintaining communication between units and coordinating logistics. Dispatch riders were tasked with carrying messages between commanders, supply depots, and frontline units. These riders had to navigate difficult terrain and evade enemy forces, often under dangerous conditions. Their role was critical in ensuring that orders and information reached their destinations when telegraph lines were unavailable. The Union's use of cavalry units as dispatch riders allowed for faster and more reliable communication compared to the Confederacy, which often relied on less mobile infantrymen for this task. The Signal Corps used visual signals, such as flags, torches, and other signaling devices, to convey messages over shorter distances or when telegraph lines were impractical. The Union's Signal Corps, established in 1860, developed a system of signal stations that allowed for the rapid transmission of messages across the battlefield. Signal stations were often located on elevated terrain, such as hills or observation towers, to maximize visibility. The Confederate Signal Corps, although smaller and less well-equipped, also employed similar techniques. The use of signal flags and torches allowed for effective communication during engagements and facilitated coordination of troop movements and logistics. Communication challenges and solutions. Communication during the Civil War faced numerous challenges, including the destruction of infrastructure, interception of messages, and the difficulties of maintaining lines of communication in the field. The destruction of telegraph lines and railroads by both Union and Confederate forces was a common tactic to disrupt enemy communication and logistics. Repairing these lines required significant resources and time, and both sides developed specialized teams to quickly restore damaged telegraph lines. Interception and decoding of enemy messages were ongoing concerns. Both Union and Confederate forces used encryption to protect sensitive information, though the effectiveness of these measures varied. The Union, with more resources, developed more sophisticated encryption techniques and employed code breakers to intercept and decode Confederate messages. Maintaining communication in the field, particularly during battles, was a significant challenge. The use of runners, mounted couriers, and signal flags helped bridge the gap when telegraph lines were unavailable. Both armies also experimented with portable telegraph units, though these were often cumbersome and difficult to deploy quickly. Importance of efficient communication in logistical planning. Efficient communication was critical to effective logistical planning and execution. The ability to rapidly convey information allowed commanders to make informed decisions, adjust supply routes, and respond to changing battlefield conditions. This was particularly important for coordinating the movement of troops and supplies, managing inventory levels, and ensuring that frontline units received the necessary resources. In the Union, the integration of the telegraph with other communication methods created a robust system that supported large-scale operations and complex supply chains. The real-time exchange of information enabled better strategic planning and more efficient allocation of resources. For example, during General Sherman's Atlanta campaign, the Union's effective communication network allowed for precise coordination of troop movements and resupply efforts, contributing to the campaign's success. The Confederacy, despite its communication challenges, also recognized the importance of efficient communication. Confederate commanders often relied on a combination of telegraph, dispatch riders, and signal flags to maintain coordination. However, the Union's superior communication infrastructure and ability to disrupt Confederate lines significantly impacted the South's logistical efficiency and overall war effort. Union logistics system during the American Civil War. The Union's logistical organization was a highly structured and efficient system that played a pivotal role in its success during the Civil War. This system was characterized by centralized control, extensive use of railroads and waterways, and a well-coordinated supply chain that ensured the steady flow of resources to the front lines. The War Department oversaw the logistics, with specialized branches such as the Quartermaster Corps, the Commissary of Subsistence, and the Ordnance Department handling different aspects of supply management. The Quartermaster Corps was responsible for providing clothing, equipment, transportation, and camp supplies. The Commissary of Subsistence managed food supplies, ensuring that the Union armies were well fed. The Ordnance Department handled the procurement and distribution of weapons and ammunition. These departments worked in concert to ensure that Union forces had the necessary resources to conduct sustained military operations. Quartermaster General Montgomery C. Meigs was one of the most influential figures in the Union's logistical efforts. Appointed in 1861, Meigs brought remarkable organizational skills and a deep understanding of logistics to the role. His contributions were instrumental in transforming the Union's supply chain into a highly efficient operation. Meigs implemented standardized procedures for procurement, transportation, and distribution, which minimized waste and ensured accountability. He also oversaw the construction of supply depots and the expansion of the Union's transportation network, including railroads and ports. Meigs' ability to foresee logistical needs and his proactive approach in addressing them significantly enhanced the Union's operational capabilities. His leadership during critical campaigns, such as the Peninsula Campaign and Sherman's March to the Sea, demonstrated the importance of effective logistics in achieving military success, successful Union logistical operations, and their impact on the war. Several key logistical operations underscore the effectiveness of the Union's supply chain and its impact on the war. The Peninsula Campaign, 1862. During the Peninsula Campaign, the Union's logistical prowess was evident as General George B. McClellan's Army of the Potomac moved to seize Richmond, Virginia. The extensive use of the James and York Rivers for transporting troops and supplies allowed the Union to maintain a well-supplied force deep in Confederate territory. Despite the campaign's ultimate failure due to tactical issues, the logistical support was exemplary and set a precedent for future operations. The Chattanooga Campaign, 1863. The logistical support during the Chattanooga Campaign was a turning point in the war. After the Battle of Chickamauga, Union forces were besieged in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The opening of the Cracker Line, a supply route via the Tennessee River, ensured the steady flow of food and supplies to the beleaguered Union troops. This logistical operation, supported by the USMRR, allowed Union forces to break the siege and secure a crucial victory. Sherman's March to the Sea, 1864. General William T. Sherman's March to the Sea highlighted the Union's ability to operate deep within enemy territory without traditional supply lines. Sherman's forces relied on foraging and local resources, demonstrating flexibility and ingenuity in logistics. This operation not only crippled the Confederacy's ability to wage war by destroying resources, but also showcased the Union's logistical superiority. Role of the United States Military Railroad, USMRR. The United States Military Railroad, USMRR, played a crucial role in the Union's logistical operations. Established in 1862, the USMRR was tasked with the construction, maintenance, and operation of railroads for military purposes. Under the leadership of figures like Herman Haupt, the USMRR ensured that railroads were used efficiently to support Union operations. The USMRR was responsible for repairing and operating captured Southern railroads, building new lines to support military campaigns, and ensuring the rapid movement of troops and supplies. The effectiveness of the USMRR was particularly evident during the Chattanooga Campaign, where the ability to quickly restore and use rail lines was vital in lifting the siege. Haupt's innovations, such as prefabricated bridge components and the use of construction battalions to quickly repair damaged tracks, were critical to maintaining the Union's logistical advantage. The USMRR's efforts not only facilitated the movement of supplies, but also allowed for the rapid redeployment of forces, contributing to the Union's strategic flexibility. Confederate logistics system during the American Civil War. The Confederate logistics system faced significant and multifaceted challenges throughout the Civil War. Unlike the Union, the Confederacy had a relatively underdeveloped industrial base, limited transportation infrastructure, and faced continuous disruption from Union forces. The Southern economy, heavily reliant on agriculture, lacked the capacity to produce the vast quantities of arms, ammunition, and other supplies needed for a prolonged conflict. The Union blockade further exacerbated these challenges by severely restricting the Confederacy's ability to import essential goods, including weapons, medicine, and food. Railroads, vital for moving supplies, were sparse and poorly maintained, with different rail gauges complicating the transfer of goods between lines. Additionally, the South's dependence on local procurement and the impressment of civilian resources often led to tensions and reduced public support for the war effort. Quartermaster General Abraham C. Myers was a central figure in the Confederate logistics system. Appointed in 1861, Myers faced the daunting task of organizing and maintaining supply lines with limited resources. His efforts were crucial in the early war years as he sought to standardize procurement processes and improve the efficiency of supply distribution. Myers worked to establish a network of supply depots and sought to improve the Confederacy's transportation infrastructure. He prioritized the allocation of scarce resources and attempted to mitigate the impact of the Union blockade by supporting domestic production of war materials. Despite his efforts, Myers was often hampered by the inherent limitations of the Confederate economy and the continuous disruption caused by Union military operations. Successes. Despite the significant challenges, there were moments of strategic success and notable failures in Confederate logistics. Confederate forces often displayed remarkable resourcefulness in securing supplies. Local procurement and the use of captured Union equipment helped sustain Confederate armies in the field. For example, General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia frequently operated on shoestring logistics, relying on local resources and ingenuity to maintain its effectiveness. The use of blockade runners was a key strategy to circumvent the Union blockade and bring in essential supplies from abroad. These fast, stealthy ships successfully smuggled arms, medicine, and other critical goods into the Confederacy, though the risks and costs were high. Failures. The Confederacy's logistical system suffered from several critical failures that had severe consequences for its war effort. The Confederacy's industrial capacity was insufficient to meet the demands of the war. The South lacked the factories to produce the necessary arms and ammunition, relying heavily on imports that were curtailed by the Union blockade. This shortage of war material hindered the Confederacy's ability to equip and sustain its armies, leading to numerous instances where soldiers went into battle poorly armed and supplied. The Confederate rail network was inadequate and poorly maintained. Different rail gauges between states complicated logistics, as goods often had to be transferred between trains at state borders, delaying supplies and reducing efficiency. The Union's targeted destruction of rail lines and key hubs further disrupted Confederate logistics, leading to severe supply shortages at critical moments. The Confederate government's policy of impressment, seizing goods and resources from civilians, further strained relations between the military and the civilian population. This practice, while necessary to support the war effort, led to resentment and decreased morale among Southern civilians, undermining support for the Confederate cause. Siege of Vicksburg. The Siege of Vicksburg, 1863, highlighted the severe logistical shortcomings of the Confederacy. The inability to adequately supply and reinforce the besieged city led to its eventual surrender, giving the Union control of the Mississippi River and splitting the Confederacy in two. Atlanta Campaign. The fall of Atlanta in 1864 was another significant logistical failure. The loss of this major railroad hub crippled the Confederacy's ability to move supplies and reinforcements, severely weakening its strategic position. General William T. Sherman's subsequent march to the sea further devastated Southern infrastructure and resource bases, compounding the Confederacy's logistical woes. Petersburg Siege. During the Siege of Petersburg, 1864 to 1865, Confederate supply lines were continuously targeted by Union forces. The inability to maintain adequate supplies for the defending army led to deteriorating conditions and morale, contributing to the eventual fall of Petersburg and the Confederate capital, Richmond. Medical logistics during the American Civil War. Evacuation systems. The evacuation and treatment of wounded soldiers were critical aspects of medical logistics during the Civil War. Both the Union and Confederate armies developed systems to manage the care and transportation of the injured from the battlefield to medical facilities. Initially, the evacuation of wounded soldiers was chaotic and unorganized. Over time, however, both sides improved their methods. The Union's implementation of an organized ambulance corps in 1862, led by Dr. Jonathan Letterman, significantly improved the efficiency of battlefield evacuations. This system used a tiered approach. Stretcher bearers and ambulance wagons transported the wounded from the front lines to field hospitals, where initial treatment was provided before moving the soldiers to larger, more permanent hospitals. Confederate forces, while less well-equipped, also developed similar systems. They faced greater challenges due to limited resources and infrastructure, but managed to establish a functional, if less efficient, evacuation process. Field hospitals. Field hospitals were set up close to battlefields to provide immediate care to the wounded. These facilities were often established in tents, barns, or other available structures. Surgeons performed emergency surgeries, such as amputations, and provided basic medical care to stabilize patients before they were moved to larger hospitals. The establishment and operation of field hospitals and medical depots. Field hospitals and medical depots were vital components of Civil War medical logistics, ensuring that wounded soldiers received timely and adequate care. Union field hospitals were relatively well organized, thanks to the efforts of medical professionals like Dr. Letterman. These hospitals were typically located within a few miles of the battlefield and were designed to handle large numbers of casualties. They were staffed by surgeons, nurses, and orderlies who worked tirelessly to treat the wounded. The Union also established general hospitals in major cities, which provided long-term care for seriously injured soldiers. Confederate field hospitals faced significant challenges due to limited medical supplies and personnel. Despite these obstacles, Confederate medical staff made remarkable efforts to care for the wounded. Improvised medical facilities were common, and the lack of resources often forced surgeons to reuse bandages and operate with minimal anesthesia. Medical depots. Medical depots were established to store and distribute medical supplies to field hospitals and other medical facilities. These depots played a crucial role in maintaining a steady supply of medicines, bandages, surgical instruments, and other essential items. The Union's more extensive rail and transportation network allowed for more efficient distribution of supplies from medical depots to the front lines. Confederate depots, on the other hand, struggled with shortages and transportation issues, often leading to critical supply deficits. Medical supply chains were fundamental to the success of both the Union and Confederate medical systems. Ensuring a steady flow of medical supplies was essential for treating wounded soldiers and maintaining the overall health of the armies. The Union's industrial capacity and well-developed transportation infrastructure facilitated the efficient management of medical supply chains. The Medical Department of the United States Army coordinated the procurement, storage, and distribution of medical supplies. The establishment of dedicated medical supply depots and the use of railroads and steamboats ensured that field hospitals and other medical facilities were adequately supplied. The Confederate medical supply chain faced numerous challenges, including limited industrial capacity, Union blockades, and transportation difficulties. Despite these obstacles, Confederate medical personnel displayed ingenuity in sourcing and distributing supplies. They relied heavily on local resources, captured Union supplies, and smuggled goods to sustain their medical operations. However, the persistent shortages of essential items like medicines, surgical instruments, and bandages often compromised the quality of care. Role of organizations like the U.S. Sanitary Commission. The U.S. Sanitary Commission played a pivotal role in supporting the Union's medical logistics and improving the overall health and well-being of soldiers. Established in 1861, the U.S. Sanitary Commission was a civilian organization that worked closely with the Union Army to provide medical and sanitary support. The commission conducted inspections of military camps and hospitals, advocated for better sanitary practices, and supplied medical facilities with much-needed supplies. The organization also played a crucial role in fundraising, organizing sanitary fairs, and other events to generate funds for medical supplies and care. The U.S. Sanitary Commission significantly improved the efficiency and effectiveness of the Union's medical logistics. Its efforts helped reduce the incidence of disease in military camps, ensured that medical facilities were adequately supplied, and provided critical support to the medical department. The Commission's work in training nurses and establishing volunteer brigades also enhanced the quality of care provided to wounded soldiers. Confederate aid societies. In the Confederacy, various aid societies, such as the Ladies' Aid Societies and the Confederate States Medical and Surgical Journal, provided support similar to that of the U.S. Sanitary Commission. These organizations raised funds, collected supplies, and volunteered their services to assist in the care of wounded soldiers. While not as organized or well-funded as their Union counterparts, these groups played an essential role in sustaining Confederate medical logistics. Case studies of major campaigns during the American Civil War. Logistics of the Gettysburg Campaign. The Gettysburg Campaign in 1863 was a critical turning point in the Civil War, showcasing the importance of logistics in military operations. General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia and General George G. Meade's Army of the Potomac both relied heavily on their logistical capabilities to sustain their forces. Confederate logistics. General Lee's decision to invade the North was partially driven by logistical needs, as he sought to relieve pressure on Virginia's war-ravaged countryside and draw supplies from the rich farmlands of Pennsylvania. The Confederate Army moved through the Shenandoah Valley, utilizing its agricultural bounty and existing transportation networks to gather food and forage. However, the Confederates faced significant logistical challenges. Their supply lines stretched thin as they moved further into Union territory. The lack of a secure rail network and the Union's control of key rivers hampered the Confederates' ability to transport supplies. The Confederate Army had to rely heavily on foraging, which often put them at odds with local civilians and limited their operational flexibility. Union logistics. The Union Army, on the other hand, benefited from a more robust logistical infrastructure. The Union's extensive rail network and control of major rivers allowed for the efficient movement of troops and supplies. During the Gettysburg Campaign, the Union Quartermaster Corps ensured that Meade's forces were well supplied with food, ammunition, and medical supplies. The Union's ability to quickly reinforce and resupply its army via the railroads played a crucial role in their victory at Gettysburg. The efficient logistical support enabled Meade to concentrate his forces rapidly and respond to Lee's maneuvers, ultimately leading to a decisive Union victory. Sherman's March to the Sea, a logistical triumph. General William T. Sherman's March to the Sea in 1864 is often cited as a logistical masterpiece, demonstrating innovative strategies and the importance of flexibility in military logistics. Union strategy and execution. Sherman's strategy involved moving his army from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia, with minimal reliance on traditional supply lines. Instead, Sherman's forces lived off the land, foraging for food and supplies as they advanced. This approach allowed Sherman to maintain the momentum of his campaign without being tied down by long and vulnerable supply lines. The Union Army's ability to forage effectively was facilitated by detailed planning and reconnaissance. Sherman's forces systematically targeted areas with abundant resources, ensuring a steady supply of food and forage. The destruction of Confederate infrastructure, including railroads, factories, and farms, further crippled the South's logistical capabilities and demonstrated the Union's logistical superiority. Confederate response. The Confederate forces, already struggling with logistical challenges, were unable to effectively counter Sherman's advance. The destruction of railroads and other transportation networks hindered their ability to move troops and supplies, exacerbating the South's logistical difficulties. Sherman's march not only showcased the Union's logistical prowess, but also highlighted the Confederacy's vulnerabilities. The Siege of Vicksburg. Logistics in a prolonged campaign. The Siege of Vicksburg in 1863 was a crucial Union victory that showcased the importance of logistics in prolonged military operations. Union logistics. General Ulysses S. Grant's campaign to capture Vicksburg relied heavily on secure and efficient supply lines. The Union's control of the Mississippi River and its tributaries allowed Grant to transport troops and supplies quickly and efficiently. The use of riverboats and railroads ensured a steady flow of provisions, ammunition, and reinforcements. Grant's logistical planning was meticulous. He established supply depots along the Mississippi River, ensuring that his forces were well provisioned throughout the campaign. The Union Navy played a critical role in maintaining control of the river, enabling continuous resupply despite Confederate efforts to disrupt Union logistics. Confederate logistics. The Confederate defenders of Vicksburg faced severe logistical challenges. The Union blockade and control of the Mississippi River effectively cut off the city from external supplies. The Confederate garrison, under General John C. Pemberton, relied on dwindling local resources and struggled with shortages of food, ammunition, and medical supplies. The prolonged siege strained the Confederate defenders, leading to malnutrition and weakened morale. The inability to break the Union blockade or secure alternative supply routes ultimately forced Pemberton to surrender, giving the Union control of the Mississippi River and splitting the Confederacy in two. Water logistics. How water supply affected these campaigns. Water logistics played a crucial role in the success and failure of military operations during the Civil War. The availability and control of water sources significantly impacted the outcomes of major campaigns. Gettysburg Campaign. During the Gettysburg Campaign, both Union and Confederate forces had to consider the availability of water for their troops and animals. The presence of numerous streams and rivers in Pennsylvania provided adequate water sources, but securing access to these sources was vital. Union forces, with better logistical support, were able to maintain a steady water supply, whereas Confederate troops, advancing through unfamiliar territory, faced more challenges in securing water. Sherman's March to the Sea. In Sherman's March to the Sea, water logistics were managed through a combination of foraging and utilizing local water sources. Sherman's troops took control of wells, streams, and rivers along their route, ensuring a continuous supply of water. The ability to secure water sources as they advanced was crucial for maintaining the health and effectiveness of Sherman's forces. Siege of Vicksburg. Water logistics were particularly critical during the Siege of Vicksburg. The Union's control of the Mississippi River not only facilitated the movement of supplies, but also ensured access to fresh water for Union troops. In contrast, the Confederate defenders, cut off from the river, faced significant difficulties in securing potable water. The lack of clean water contributed to the deteriorating conditions within the besieged city and the eventual Confederate surrender. Conclusion. The Civil War marked a transformative period in military logistics, showcasing the importance of efficient supply chains, technological integration, and robust communication networks. The Union's logistical success was characterized by centralized control, standardized procedures, and extensive use of railroads and telegraphs. Key figures like Quartermaster General Montgomery C. Meigs and innovations such as the organized ambulance corps and field hospitals significantly enhanced logistical efficiency and medical care. Confederate logistics, while resourceful, struggled with limited industrial capacity and disrupted supply lines, highlighting the critical role of infrastructure and resource management. Technological advancements during the Civil War, particularly in transportation and communication, had a profound impact on logistics. The widespread use of railroads enabled rapid troop and supply movements, while the telegraph facilitated real-time coordination and strategic planning. These innovations set the stage for future military logistics practices, influencing strategies in World War I, World War II, and modern military operations. The principles of centralized control, technological innovation, and logistical flexibility learned during the Civil War continue to be fundamental in military logistics today. Modern perceptions of Civil War logistics recognize the conflict as a pivotal period that introduced many logistical practices and technologies still in use. Historical analysis celebrates the ingenuity and adaptability of Union and Confederate forces in overcoming logistical challenges. The technological and medical logistics advancements are seen as precursors to modern systems, with the Civil War laying the groundwork for future military logistics developments. This legacy underscores the critical role of logistics in determining the outcomes of military campaigns and shaping the course of warfare.